It's good to see you out this morning. How much more valuable is a man than a sheep? It's an interesting question that Jesus asked on an occasion where he had healed someone. And he talks to them about the fact that he had healed someone on the Sabbath day, and they were blaming him for committing a sin because he had worked on the Sabbath day. And he basically said to them all, if you've got a sheep and it falls in a pit on the Sabbath day, don't you go lift the sheep out of the pit? They all did. They all would. They all knew that's what you did. And so then he asks the question, how much more valuable is a man than a sheep? He helped a man who had been unable to function in life because of whether it was an injury or disease or whatever had been the case with that man. His arm was unusable. And Jesus healed him. There is an assumption here in the question itself. When Jesus asks how much more valuable, he's not asking if a man is more valuable than a sheep. That's a foregone conclusion. The question is just how much more valuable. Troubles me sometimes in our society today that people have gotten to the point that they do not value human life over the life of an animal. Maybe it's because of the teaching of evolution that says that people are just evolved from animals. Maybe that's why it is. Maybe that teaching over the generations says that, well, we're just basically just animals of a different sort. Maybe that's why we don't recognize the sanctity of human life. That human life is more valuable. Jesus' audience didn't have any question about it, but he asked how much more valuable. Well, I would suggest that it's infinitely more valuable. Jesus himself said that human life is of such great value that the soul of a human being is more valuable than possessing all of the possessions of the entire earth, which would include all of the sheep in the world, as well as all of the other animals out there. One human soul is more valuable than that. On another occasion, there was a man who was possessed by a demon, and Jesus cast that demon out. Well, several demons, actually. Legion is what the demons said their name was because they were many. He cast the demons out of the man into an entire herd of pigs that then all went and jumped off a cliff and killed themselves in the water, in the ocean, or the Sea of Galilee. He thought that man's, not the man's life, because the man was alive, but that man's sanity, that man being able to have a clear, sound mind instead of being inhabited by those demons that were inhabiting him, he thought that man's clarity of mind was more valuable than the lives of, I think it was about 2,000 pigs that died in that incident. And he thought that man's mind, being freed from the demons that possessed him, was more valuable than those pigs. So there's no doubt that Jesus believed there was a great gulf between the value of an animal of any kind and a human life. That's at odds with some of those living today. One Dr. Peter Singer, he was pretty well known back maybe 40 years ago in the 1980s. But he said the philosophical foundations of the sanctity of life view have been knocked asunder we can no longer base our ethics on the notion that human beings are a special form of life made in the image of God, singled out from all other animals with an immortal soul. Why can't we? It's still true. Why can't we still believe that? But he says we can't base our ethics on that idea. Our better understanding of our own nature has bridged that gulf that once was thought to lie between ourselves and other species. In other words, people aren't special. They're just animals like every other animal on earth. Why should we believe that the mere fact that a being is a member of the species Homo sapien endows its life with some unique, almost infinite value? Only the fact that the defective infant is of the species Homo sapien. He's talking about why we should get rid of babies that have birth defects, basically. Why we should just put them down like we would a horse with a broken leg or a dog with rabies or something like that. And he says only the fact that the defective infant is of the species Homo sapiens leads us to treat it any differently from a dog or a pig. The order of species or species membership alone should not have that kind of moral relativity. But that's exactly what it should have, because God did create man and woman, human beings, in his own image. The life of a human being is more valuable because of that very fact. There was actually a journal of medicine's, a journal of medical ethics article that was published in 2012, so a little over 10 years ago, about 12 years ago, that actually argued that parents should be able to terminate their newborn babies for any reason. They are only potential persons. So babies aren't really people. They have a potential of becoming people, but they're not people. But what is human life? Why is it more valuable? James chapter 2 and verse 26 says, as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so also faith apart from works is dead. So he explains a human being has a body and a spirit that work in conjunction to make us a living soul. And when that spirit is separated, then the body is dead. So that's part of our human life. When does human life begin? Well, some, as this Journal of Medical Ethics article argued, some believe that an infant becomes a human at some point after birth. Maybe 6 months, maybe a year, maybe when they can start walking and talking, maybe when they can feed themselves. At what point? They do not always say. But they think that it happens at some point after the baby's born. Some believe that a baby receives the soul when it takes the first breath of air. When they come out of the womb and they first breathe, then that baby becomes a living human being. Some believe that life and humanity begins when the baby could survive outside of the mother's body. They call that viability, the point at which the baby could be taken out and could still survive. That has changed over the years. It used to be about 34 weeks was the minimum, and now they've had little ones that were at 22 or 3 weeks, right in there, that have survived because of our technology and incubators and things like that. They've been able to keep a baby alive at much earlier points. But the biblical teaching is that life begins at conception. That's the only one that the Bible teaches. When Mary was told by the angel that Jesus was within her, she wasn't said to be with a fetus. She was said to be with child. He was already a child. He was an unborn child, but he was already a child. And throughout the Bible, pregnant women are described as being with child. When we think about the value of human life, it's not just at that first stage of where does it start, but many times what makes the human life valuable. Arguments have been made in many countries about different diseases or different handicaps of one kind or another that would make a person not worthy of life. Our founding fathers in this country disagreed with that. Certainly the Bible disagrees with that. You know, you think about our founding fathers, they talked about how we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among those are life, the right to live. Even if our life doesn't measure up to someone else's standards of what life ought to be, we have the right to live it. Let's think about some of the ways that people despise human life. I tell you this story. A young unmarried girl has become pregnant. She was supposed to be married soon, but her fiancé will know the child she's carrying is not his, and he'll consider leaving her. If he does it quietly, she'll have enough trouble. But if he tells it publicly, he would be believed over her. Her religious parents would be scandalized if it's ever discovered. In fact, under her country's laws, she could be executed if it's found out. She's poor, and her society doesn't offer many opportunities to a woman other than marriage. And no one else is going to want to marry her after she's had this child. There's little hope that she can raise the child alone, even if she's not lawfully punished. She'll be ridiculed by everyone who finds out. No one would believe her if she told them who the baby's father really is. And even if her fiancé marries her, rumors will abound because the baby's going to be born too soon. Should she run away? She could tell people somewhere else that she's a widow, and maybe they'd believe that. Should she kill herself? Maybe no one would ever know. It could look like an accident. There's a cliff outside of town. She could throw herself off of that, and it could seem like an accidental death. Should she cause a miscarriage, a stillbirth, abort that baby? It's certainly not something she could go to a doctor to do, but she's heard of different things that could be dangerous to the baby and could cause it to be lost and for it to pass. And it could be dangerous. It could cause her harm. But if she acts soon, maybe no one would even know. What should she do? Well, thankfully, this young, unwed, pregnant girl made some different choices, as did her fiancé. He chose to stay with her, and Jesus was born and raised by Mary and Joseph. There will never be another Jesus. But how many special children who could have done great things were never born? We'll never know what great things some of those children could have done. In Psalm 51 and verse 5, the psalmist David here says, "Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me." David began to exist at the moment of conception. It wasn't just a blob of matter that later became David. He said, "My mother conceived me." Jeremiah is told that God knew him while he was yet in his mother's womb, that while he was knit together in his mother's womb. Proverbs chapter 6 and verses 16 and 17, Solomon writes that there are 6 things that the Lord hates. Yes, 7 that are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood. What blood could be more innocent than that of an unborn baby? And yet how much blood has been shed. Today is Memorial Day weekend. Tomorrow is being Memorial Day. And certainly a lot have died in wars in this country over the years. You have a sample of that in your handout that shows all the numbers for that. And the comparison to that of the number of abortions. All the wars our country's fought, all the men and women who have died in those wars over 200 plus years of our country's history. And it doesn't even come close to the number who have died in abortions. In fact, the total number is over 63 million. It's hard to get exact counts because certainly there not always was an accounting for every one. But just since 1973. In the world, there have been over 1.4 billion children never born. How much more valuable is a man than a sheep? To put it in perspective, or to try to give us a visual image of it, this sheet of paper has X's, a lot of X's on it. In fact, there are 3,000 on this page. If each one of those X's represented an abortion, that would be 3,000. Of course, if it was filled on the other side, that would be 6,000. In order to represent the number of abortions that we've had in this country since 1973, what do you think it would take? A stack of pages how big? Front and back, not just one page, not a few pages. This is a ream of paper, 500 sheets. If all 500 sheets of this were filled front and back, that would still only be about 3 million. In fact, there are 10 of these reams that fit in a paper box, stacked 5 and 5. We have here 2 boxes full. That would be plus the ream. That's how much it would be. Each one filled front and back with X's. Each page. 2 boxes plus another package of paper. That's what it would be. To represent all of the people in the last 50 years who were never born. Not that they were miscarried or that there was a problem and the baby, they lost the baby. Not that, but intentionally gotten rid of so that they never got a chance at life. One wonders, those hands that shed innocent blood. God, of course, is forgiving, and He can forgive someone of that as much as anything else. But why do we value human life so lightly that the most defenseless and innocent of us have for so many years been destroyed. But that's certainly, we've made some progress in the last couple of years at stopping some of that. But there are still far too many that die. But that's not the only way that we devalue human life. There's also euthanasia. It's interesting, the phrase euthanasia means good death. But sometimes it's not such a good death after all. Many times the elderly are just, well, they can't contribute to society anymore. They've outlived their usefulness. Or they're sick and it's costing too much to give them medicine and keep them alive. And so people that are younger than them make decisions to get rid of them. Genesis 1:27 says that God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him, both male and female. He created them. In Leviticus 19 and verse 32, we're told that we should stand up before the gray-headed one and honor the face of the elderly and fear your God. And yet we don't often honor the elderly. Sometimes the argument is made, well, it's their choice if they choose to allow medicine to be given to them, a drug to be given to them to end their life. That's their life, that's their business, that's their choice. Did you know that nearly 1 in 4 doctors admit that they have given patients a drug dose to end their life without permission? Without permission. It wasn't the patient's choice. The doctor chose for them that it was time for their life to end. In Belgium, where euthanasia by consent of the patient is legal, that was the case, that 1 in 4 doctors said, yeah, it's supposed to be with their consent, but 25% of the doctors said, I've done it without their permission. He goes on to say here, and we believe this is an important note, the percentage of involuntary euthanasia in patients who were 80 years old or over rose to 52.7%. Over half of them were without their consent, involuntary. And those who had diseases other than cancer, the figure rose to 67%. That's 2 out of 3. The decision was not even discussed with the patient in 78% of cases. Didn't even ask the patient if they wanted that. Who are we to make decisions for another person on when their life should end to that degree? And yet it happens. The doctor decides. It's too expensive, too much trouble, too risky. You know, if they try to do that surgery and you die on the operating table, your family might sue the hospital. But if you just died of what seemed to be natural causes, then no problem, no legal problems for the hospital, I guess. But what about suicide? That's another way that people don't value their own life. And there are many who struggle with suicidal thoughts. They struggle with depression. They struggle with not feeling like their life is worth living. We've got to instill in people the preciousness and the value of their life. Let everyone know how special and unique an individual they are. In Acts chapter 16, verses 27 and 28, the jailer wakes up to find the prison doors open. He thinks the prisoners have escaped. and he was about to kill himself because he knew he was going to die anyway. If they found the prisoners that he had been told to keep in the prison escape, he was ready to kill himself. Better he do it than they do it for him, was probably his thoughts. Matthew 27 and verse 5 and chapter 1 and verse 18 of Acts tells us about Judas going out and killing himself after he had betrayed Jesus. So many are mentally ill and suffer from that mental illness to the point that they take their own lives. But we need to do everything we can to help them realize their life is valuable and that they need to live and live it for the Lord. And then, of course, there's just flat out murder, where someone doesn't value the life of another. And we've all heard the stories of, and it's been going on for years, somebody's murdered over a pair of tennis shoes or a parking place, or because they got cut somebody off in traffic. And they're killed. Stabbed, run over, shot, you name it. Anything that a person can use as a weapon has been used as a weapon, sometimes just even their bare hands. That's nothing new. Started with the first two children born on this planet, Cain and Abel. Genesis chapter 4 and verse 8. Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Did he hit him with a rock? Stab him with a sharp stick? Choke him? We don't even know how he killed him, but that was the first murder. Didn't involve a gun. They didn't have guns back then. Can't blame that one on guns. Murder has been going on from that time to this. But notice what God said to Cain, or to Noah and his family after the flood. In Genesis 9 and verses 5 and 6. Here's how much God thinks of human beings above animals. He says, "For your lifeblood I will require a reckoning. From every beast I will require it." So if an animal kills a human being, that animal will be required to pay for that. "And from man." If a man kills another, and they'll be required to pay for it. He says, "From his fellow man I will require a reckoning for the life of a man." So you kill somebody, you forfeit your right to life. You've murdered another. You've given up your right, and a reckoning will be required. "Whoever sheds the blood of a man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image." God says you kill somebody, you die. That's what's supposed to happen when you murder somebody. Now, we're not talking about an accidental death. He made arrangements for that if somebody was killed accidentally, which certainly happens. But if it was murder like Cain murdered his brother Abel, he said this is the way they're to be put to death, executed for that. Well, how do we feel about human life? How do we value it? In Proverbs chapter 24, we'll close with this, verses 11 and 12. "Rescue those who are being taken away to death. Hold back those who are stumbling to the slaughter. If you say, 'Behold, we didn't know it,' does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? Does not he who keeps watch over your souls know it? And will he not repay man according to his work?" We can't just turn a blind eye and pretend that it doesn't exist. There are evils in this world. There are those who do not value human life. Let's be sure we're not among those. And let's be sure that we're trying to rescue those who are perishing. But you know what's even more important than a human life? We talked about it earlier. That's that human soul. It's our responsibility as Christians to try to bring others to Christ too, so that their soul can be saved, so that they can have a hope of an eternal home in heaven with Him, just like we have a hope of that. If you're here this morning and you are not a Christian, if you're not a follower of Christ, and then you don't have that hope of an eternity in heaven with God, with Christ. Make the changes you need to make in your life today. If you believe in Him, repent of your sins, confess Him as the Christ, be buried with Him in baptism to wash your sins away, calling on the name of the Lord. If you're here and you are a Christian, but perhaps you haven't been trying to rescue the perishing, perhaps you haven't been trying to bring others to Christ out of the clutches of Satan. Satan does not value human life or human souls. They're just tools to him to be used and abused. Let's help others get away from him and be rescued by Jesus. If you're here and you have a need to respond for any reason, please do so as we stand and as we sing. Jesus said.